Welcome back to another episode of SaaS Buyers Club. I'm your host, Omeed,
Your co-host Joe.
and this week we're going to be interviewing Ron Skelton. Ron is the host of the podcast How to Exit. He's the co-founder at The Hub. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that and everything else he does. He's done a lot of things. So it's a real pleasure to have you here, Ron. And yeah, why don't we just start by just having you tell our audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, and we'll just start there.
Awesome. Like you said, I'm Ron Skelton. I'm the host of the How to Exit podcast. And prior to that, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur since I was a young kid. Make the story shorter, I was trying to go work for my father. He owned a painting and remodeling business when I was young. He told me I was too young to work for him. So when he would go to work, I would push our push mower. We lived in the country. We're about 5 miles from town. I would literally push it into town and mow lawns while he was at work. Until one day I got bit by a dog and the police got involved. The two pit bulls bit me on the legs. Didn't damage me too bad, but the police called and told my dad that I'd been bitten, and he wanted to speak to me, and the cop had to tell my father, "Oh, he's over there mowing the lawn with his legs bleeding." He said the guy already paid him, and he's gonna mow that lawn. So, I've been an entrepreneur since I was a teenager, and at that point, my father realized that I probably should work with him. I'm willing to do that. I can climb a ladder. I'm willing to go paint houses and do what he needed to do, and I've been doing one thing or another in that space ever since. We were talking a little bit before the show. I spent some time in the military. I spent some time in government contracting. I joined the military because I wanted a college education and I wasn't saving any money. I'd been painting and remodeling houses for a while, and the heat was getting to me. Oklahoma sun's 110 degrees. At 19, almost 20 years old, I had a minor heat stroke. And I was like,
Mm.
okay, I'm too young to be having things like that happen. I was out painting the house at 110 degrees, standing on the eve of the shingles, and it's 110 outside, so it's 125 on the black shingles, and
Mm.
passed out and slid down and didn't get hurt too bad, but that's why I did it. So I left, joined the military to get a college education, and ever since then, even like getting out of there, I worked for the government for a little while after the military and worked at startups, worked at mostly companies that were in the tech space. Worked for Lockheed for a little while. We were talking about that, but I don't talk too much about that stuff. It was all classified work. But yeah, I just been an entrepreneur ever since I was young. My first kind of mergers and acquisitions deal, I had so many business I probably should have sold. If you're a serial entrepreneur, you shut things down a little early and you don't realize it was sellable. It just wasn't, it wasn't
Mhm.
scalable. So you shut it down because you had something, you had just your side project outran your main project. So you shut the other one down. I did that a few times, but I had a marketing agency, and one of my main clients came down and said, "Hey, look, I'll give you some money. I'll give you a percentage ownership on my." It was a kind of creative structure deal. "I'll give you a piece of my business. I'll give you a piece of every real estate transaction we do. Take your office, move it upstairs, and come be our in-house marketing agency." And I did that. Made most of my money in real estate. And when the market dried up on what we were doing in real estate, and I hired a performance coach to do something else, figure out if it was me or the industry or what was going on. And he made a statement, said, you should be playing a bigger game with everything, all the education you have. Why are you buying these single little houses? And he messed me up because I would flip a house and make 40 grand and put the business with the 40 grand to be wired into our business account. And I'd hear him in the back of my head, but you should be playing a bigger game. And I was like, so now I had to go find a bigger game. And I thought about one of the guys, I'll credit him. I don't think he even knows that it was kind of him. One of the guys moved from real estate to this space about a year before I started looking at it. His name was Scott Cleveland. I was talking to him the other day, and it reminded me. He called me up looking to raise money for a business he was buying. He started talking about all this mergers and acquisition stuff, and I think that spurred me digging into this and figuring out what it was. So,
Mm.
and that's how I ended up in this space. I've taken a few of the courses that are out there. Was left with a lot of questions. Right,
Mhm.
not that there was anything wrong with the courses, I won't say who they are because 'cause I'm not picking on them. But
Sure.
you take a course, it's 4 or 5 days, and you're in a new industry, and there's a lot of parallelisms between this and real estate, but there's a lot of differences.
Yeah, I always say that.
Yeah, and it's one of those I still got all these questions, and so I just fired up a mic, started interviewing the top people on the planet that do this deal to learn, and ended up finding out I really like being on the mic and really learning from people and really excited. So I don't care what happens. I'll probably continue running the show and doing some form of podcast because it's enjoyable to learn from other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think we're touching on what the topic of today is going to be. You've interviewed what, like 200 guests for how to exit, something around that?
We have 100 technically, there's our show count, I think, is at 175. I've pre-recorded about another 20 or so that puts us at 195, and so I've interviewed at least a half a dozen people that never aired the show. God bless their souls, some lawyers and some accountants are really boring, so we would get most of the way through it, like, there's just no unique content, there was nothing unique compared to the other shows I've done, and it was like trying to, thaw ice in the refrigerator. It was just
It's
like,
like watching paint dry for an
yeah, it's
hour.
like yeah, it's like
Yeah.
nobody's gonna listen to this. There's nothing the guy, when you have to pull teeth, like you ask a yes or no question and a detailed question, and they go, "Yeah, how did you get started?" Graduated college and went to work for a PE firm." You know, you know,
Mhm.
every answer is 3
Oh my
seconds.
God.
I was like, "Okay." I have a rule of thumb on my show. If I talk more than 25% of the time, my team has to edit me out.
That's a good
Mm.
rule.
It's
That's
the
a good
it's the
rule.
g it's the guest show, right? And mainly because I think in the beginning I still had imposter syndrome. Like,
Mhm.
I to some extent, I still feel like that. I've interviewed all these people, some of the best in the world. I've learned a lot. We did a roll-up
Okay.
for Go ahead.
Little side note real quick. Imposter syndrome is something that a lot of people struggle with. So I'm curious, just this is actually a really cool topic and it's something that I talk about often and actually doesn't I didn't plan on bringing this through, but I think it's a really
It
interesting
is.
topic. So, imposter syndrome, what do you do about it to keep it at bay or like to solve it?
I'll tell you the for the first I did not for the podcast, I'll make it easier. I didn't actually, listen to any of my own shows. I
Mhm.
hired teams to do all my editing. I didn't listen for over 100 shows. I recorded over 100 shows before I ever sit there and listen through an entire show. I was terrified that I would hate what I sounded like behind a mic.
Mhm.
Or I sounded stupid or whatever it was, and I was enjoying the process of learning from them, and people were liking it and listening to it, and that's all that mattered. For the rest of it, I finally clicked the real I think it's the movie Catch Me If You Can, where there's a scene in there, "How did you teach college?" or whatever, and he's like, "I didn't have to be the professor, I just had to be one chapter" I'm gonna butcher this, but I have to be one chapter ahead of all the other students.
Oh, it's so funny.
That's what clicked in my head after a while. It's like, I don't have to be the mergers and acquisitions expert. I need to be a chapter ahead of the buyers I'm talking to. I need to be a chapter ahead of anybody I'm willing to help. I don't do coaching and consulting at this stage because maybe because it's still a little bit of that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
But as long as I'm a chapter or two ahead of the people I'm working around, I know enough to move us forward. And I bring in team. The other thing is I surround myself with just amazing people. That's why one of the reasons I did the show is I got a heck of a network now, right? I always say there's no question I can't answer, and most of the time it's because I'm gonna call one of you guys.
Yeah.
That
I hear
would
what
yeah,
you're
go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying there about your experience with imposter syndrome. I'd go so far as to say more people should have it. And on the other hand, you shouldn't be too worried about it because that real estate experience goes such a long way.
Mhm.
There, I'll say, as a professional in the space, there's not much more to know, but there is. That, in addition to your past analytical experience,
Yeah.
those type of things really work together at M&A because it's so procedural. So I would assuage your any syndromes there or anxiety or fears and say, you know what, practice makes perfect. Go do some practice and that'll make you feel better. And that's what I do if I'm ever feel like, oh, this is gonna be tough. I just do it. And if you're not with M&A, if I'm like doing a hobby, I don't know, whatever hobbies. I have a lot of hobbies, stuff like that.
Yeah. When it came to talking to business owners, I would have said the same thing, like, in the very beginning, right, coming right out of those classes, those courses and those mentoring programs, whatever, it was nerve-wracking, but one of the first things I ended up doing is I got, tagged as the chief marketing and sales officer for a small roll-up, not a big roll-up, but we ended up talking to 200 marketing agencies in a matter of less than 220 days, 216
Oh,
days or
well.
something like that, right? One-hour conversations, we were doing 3, 4 of them a week just back to back, and there was 3 of us taking turns doing them, and I was on most of those calls, and it's just you just melt through all that after you have that many conversations,
Mhm.
and so that I
100%.
like what you said, Joe. I think repetition beats imposter syndrome. That's you just gotta get in there, roll up your sleeves, and do it, right?
And I think that is essentially what you said. You cure your imposter syndrome by just hitting the books and making sure that you're at least one chapter ahead. And
Yep.
that, in and of itself, is the training required to become a professional so that you no longer feel like you're an imposter, as well as something that we talk about on this show a lot. And that a lot of the feedback and advice that people often give is make sure you're surrounded by the right advisors because
Yeah.
it's your team that's going to
Yeah.
make sure that you get across the finish line the way that you need to. So both of those things are actually great fixes for imposter syndrome.
There's one book that made a huge difference. There's a book called by Dan Sullivan called Who Not How, and it was basically one of the beautiful. I'm gonna butcher it. I butcher quotes all the time. I'm the king of butchering quotes. But there's a statement in there that says, "Any procrastination is not a curse. It's actually a blessing." And
Mm.
I'm butchering this because it's probably much more concise and brilliant than I'm gonna tell you, but it's a blessing because it tells you what you shouldn't be doing and what you should be doing. So if you're procrastinating doing something, or you have to go figure out how to do something, it's an internal mechanism to tell you probably should not be looking for, how to do it, but, who can do it for you, who already is out
Mhm.
there that does it better. So that's one of the things to look for inside of this, and you're sitting there going, "How do I do diligence?" You probably shouldn't. That's a very critical part of not getting hurt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, there is such an interesting point here though, because Ron, I'm curious your thoughts on this, but so
Mhm.
many new M&A practitioners think that they have to do it all. Is that consistent with what you found as well?
Absolutely, the most dangerous thing you can do is do it all. The most dangerous, risky thing you can do. And I don't wanna portray anybody to think that acquisition entrepreneurship is risky because it's the safest way to get into owning a business. If you look at I don't know if you guys have ever read, like, there's a research done, I think it was NerdWallet did it. They looked at 10 years consecutive SBA loans and the failure rate of SBA loans. Uh,
Yeah.
they
That's
I
the
they
big argument in support of acquisitions in terms of,
Yeah,
yeah, the failure rate is like 1 to 2% or whatever in terms of defaults on the loan,
yeah.
which shows that people are
But
successful with the process.
and if you wanna be one of those 1 to 2% that fail, do it all yourself. Yeah, because that's how you get there.
But
Yeah.
Our position is on the other side of that 1 to 2%. We're super curious what the percentage is of people that try to go for it and totally lose their ass in the process of trying to make it happen. What were you gonna say, Joe?
I was gonna just say the exact same thing, but reword a little bit. Ron, in your experience talking with first-time buyers or sellers, do you see a lot of people like we do try to do it all themselves or think that they're supposed to do it all themselves?
I do, and I always try to get them to read that book.
Oh,
Um, it's just an eye opener to understand that you're not supposed to do all of everything yourself. As an entrepreneur, if you bootstrap more than 1 or 2 companies, you got that in you because that's what we were told to do. You just roll up your sleeves and figure it
yeah.
out, right? And it's the wrong approach. A lot of people, "Well, I don't have the money to pay anybody else." Yeah, you do. It's just not in your wallet, right? It's another element of creative deal structuring
Mhm.
because you're buying a multi-million dollar business if you're doing this right, or at least a high six-figure business. There's equity. There's deferred payments and payment of premium if they're willing to take installments after the close, right? There's just so many creative ways, you know.
I agree with that. I would get from my mind, and not to steal your guys' conversation on this subject, but where my mind goes with this is as long as you have a good understanding of the industry and the business's financial performance, and then a lot of the other, not, I like to say everything because I'm not too big into universals, but a lot of the other stuff is handled by your legal advisor, your accountant, and the broker. And so those are definitely those are the very complex areas too. You can understand the basics of the business. You don't need to worry about the ins and outs of all the legals or the accounting, whatever, if it's a quality of earnings report or otherwise. So that's the way I look at it. I do see the battle with first time buyers and sellers though, because they're all, mm, a lot of people just do this, which I don't like that either, actually.
Right.
But yeah.
So, before the show, I didn't know exactly what we are talking about, so I actually made sure I outlined the top 10 things I've learned from all the
Mhm.
shows, and we can get into that a little bit later,
What's
but
up?
one of them is
Yeah.
on this topic exactly, and my note is that team players can kill as many deals as the MVPs or more, and a team player to me so in my world, the MVP, the most valuable player is the seller and the buyer, right?
Okay.
Those are the 2 most valuable, but everybody on the team thinks they're most valuable. If you ask the attorney, he's the most valuable. The deal can't get done without him. If you ask the accountant, the deal can't get done without him. If you ask any of those. But what I found in interviewing all these people and interview people that have had failed deals and deals that succeeded is when they failed, it was usually one of the team players, either on their side or the seller side. So a good example would be seller brings in a family attorney that, set up the LLC to help him do a mergers and acquisition, and the guy just doesn't understand, mergers and acquisition terminologies, contracts, and everything else, and then botches the deal when the buyer's M&A attorney comes with a set of documents and they don't understand standard reps and warranties and all the stuff that comes along with the normal deal.
I see. We definitely hear that a lot. You were probably going to say the exact same thing I'm going to say. So I'll just throw it back over to you.
Yeah, you nailed it right on the head, Ron. And that totally makes sense in terms of the team being the reason why the deal fails. And I think lawyers really get a bad rap here in terms of if you talk to most people in the space, they're like, oh, lawyers are deal killers. And we're like, where does this come from? Because if you deal with a good M&A attorney, yeah, they're not going to be a deal killer. It's who are you taking advice from is super important, is like at the crux of that point. Was that Joe, is there anything you want to add there too?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Omeed and I have talked a lot about this. One of the first things I recall, you just reminded me, Omeed, ever thinking on that subject when we started hearing it was, okay, I guess a lot of these people just don't have experience with differentiating between the types of lawyer.
Yeah.
So many lawyers do hold themselves out as general practitioners, but in the M&A world, sure, some M&A lawyers are really good at multiple things, and we do general corporate finance, or we have those skills. But M&A it's like being a heart doctor. Like it's something you do and you spend a lot of time on that. And if you're on a big firm doing M&A, like that's your division is M&A,
Mm,
or it's like corporate, like for parens M&A.
mm.
And so, in other words, a lot of people probably have really bad experiences with the wrong type of doctor for the disease or
Funny
from there.
you use the health thing. I actually had a conversation with the seller. Probably in our third call, he brings his attorney on. And then I had a fourth call with just the seller after I talked to his attorney. And I said, hey, this isn't going to go very far. I said, why? I said, your attorney's going to end up killing this deal. And he said, "Why?" I said, "This is brain surgery. This is a M&A deal, and you brought a proctologist. He's looking at the wrong end of this deal. He
No,
doesn't know." And I was being nice. I was like, he doesn't know which end he's on, right? And I think the guy's head was up there. He was a family attorney, does divorces and set up LLCs. He's never seen an M&A deal. And I said, "Be honest, you shouldn't have a broker either, because the company was a $10.5 million dollar company doing about six. It was very profitable. It was doing 6.5 million in EBITDA. It was insane, and it did a bit. Technically, it probably the revenue was higher, but the way they'd state, I think the revenue was more. Anyway, to cut back to, I'm trying to how do I be nice about this? The attorney had no business in there, and the broker probably had no business in there. At that level, he probably should have had an investment banker looking at his deal, and I didn't want that. I was considering it was a software type of service, software like a SaaS type of tool, and he had run it down with just minimal people. He got down it to where it was up and running, maintaining it. They weren't doing a lot of innovations. Everybody liked the way it was, so he got to kept his key people around, and as people left, he just didn't replace them because he didn't need them. He wasn't doing a lot of new development, and anyway. And when he did need new development, he'd outsource it. He figured out the world of outsourcing. That said, that attorney's gonna kill it, and the fact that I told him when I left, I said, "Look, it's a little bit because the way you're wanting to structure it's a little bit bigger than I would buy anyway, and you need to fire your attorney. I know he's a family friend. Go get you an mergers and acquisition attorney and take this to an investment banker. They're gonna put it in an auction process, and you're gonna make a lot more money, right? They're
Mhm.
gonna go out and the difference between a broker and a investment banker is how active the person is soliciting buyers for you, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Differentiator.
Yeah, the investment banker, if you're doing probably more than $2 or $3 million in EBITDA, probably ought to talk to see if investment bankers. It's small for investment bankers, but they'll probably take you. The cool thing is they're going to go out and find strategic buyers and find almost an auction process where they get 5 or 6 people bidding against each other, and you're gonna get the best deal. And
Well,
so
that's
That's
some
another point on the team. Go ahead, Joe.
No, I was just commenting there. That's some great advice, and I'm looking forward to some of the other lessons learned that you have to share with us today. Before we do continue down that path, though, I want to see if we're all good with sort of the introduction to you. So, if anybody out there hasn't heard of the how to, it's how to exit,
right?
right? With a
With
numeral two,
with the number
but
2 in the middle, yeah.
yeah, how to exit podcast. Definitely go check it out. It's a great podcast. Also, there's a related newsletter, right?
Yep.
And so where would people go to sign up for that newsletter?
So go to howtoexit.com, the 2 is a 2, so howtoexit.com, and then there's we call it deeper because we cover the cool thing we're doing with our podcast, and I'll show you guys this after the show, is
Sure.
last year we started turning every single podcast into a written article. So a lot of people don't have a time to watch an hour and a half worth of content, and I release 2 shows a week. So 2 hours or 3 hours worth of content a week. They just get fall behind. So every show gets converted into a written article that has the key takeaways, some key quotes, and about a 500 to 1,500 word article that pretty much encapsulates the show. And it does 2 things. Some people will read that and go, "Hey, I really want to go back and watch it," and they bookmark it and actually put it in their calendar to go back and watch it. And other people read it and go, "Yeah, it's not where it doesn't fit a need I have right now."
Mhm.
And they're aware of it, but they got to read what the show is about. So that's all found on How to Exit. There's a section called the blog, a blog
Oh,
button up there, and you can read about any show we've done in the last year. We're even going back and trying to do the old shows. It's time consuming to do the old ones because it's just additional stuff, but
yeah.
we're trying to get them all done. But go ahead.
I'll just say that's super helpful. Oh, please finish.
So we have one more newsletter that I want everybody to know about, and that's we're calling it historically was called the Hub, and it's a curated newsletter of everything that's happening in this space. So the news, we review 4 or 5 other podcasts. So often podcasts get reviewed, and we write full reviews like I do mine. I convert their show into a written article with the key takeaways and the quotes, and a paragraph or 2 about, or a page or 2 of what happened on the show, and then we summarize that and put it on our newsletter with a Medium article they can read, and they can read about the show. And to give the host a full exit, I encapsulate the show on the top of the thing so they can be reading and click and listen to it while they read. So they can actually watch it while they read it, watches it from your YouTube channel. So I make sure that happens. So we do that with the hub. That's getting renamed. That's probably the announcement of it because we haven't told anybody. We just changed the logos last night. It's going to be called Growth and Acquisitions. I think that it's more accurate to what we cover as opposed to the hub, right? So,
That's very fitting. I like that. Thanks for calling that out. Some of the people you have on there, I think the majority, but I don't know every name. But what I'm
mm,
trying to say is there's some really big speakers on there that people should definitely go check out. Why don't you throw a few names out there for us just to give people a flavor? We're not trying to get it all over.
to give everybody a little credit, most of the people on there are excellent. I'm doing a little thing for next year. I tested it, people liked it. So I did it a few weeks ago where I do Flashback Tuesdays, and I cut mostly for authors. So if you've written a book on the subject, I create a new kind of splash logo for you, show with pictures of the book and pictures of you. And it says, if you want to learn more about this author who wrote about the subject, go to episode 153 or whatever. As I was preparing for that, I thought I would have about a dozen, so I figured I'd do one a month, and I ended up with, out of the 190 shows or so I've got recorded, 47 of them are authors.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
so
Wow.
I've pretty much I realized we farm Amazon for new authors when they write on this subject, and then we'll read the reviews and stuff, and if it sounds like it's a good book, we'll do it. Some of the top, I think, I've interviewed Walker Dable, I'm probably butchering his name, with Buy Then Build. Interviewed Adam Coffey. I absolutely interviewed him 2 or 3 times. I absolutely love who he is. He's written 3 books now, all national international bestsellers about private equity. He's grown businesses through private equity and done billion-dollar exits multiple times, I think in the heat and airspace. But I'm trying to think of some of the other top guys. The current CEO of EOS. I've
Mm.
interviewed the current
Cool.
CEO.
Cool.
Yeah. He had a hell of a story. He as a team building thing, he took his entire, management team up a mountain as a mountain climbing adventure to do team building and almost killed one of them. She had altitude
Oh
sickness,
my
and
god.
he had to carry her on his back to get down to a level of helicopter. That is raw, man. I'm like, I'm 51, I'm overweight, and I've got bad back and bad knees. We're just gonna die on top. I wouldn't leave you, but we're gonna die on top of that mountain together. Uh, I don't I'd have to be the guy getting carried up there to start with, but yeah, that was a heck of a story, but I've had some really
That is
cool
such a
people.
story.
Trying to think of other people that really stood out.
That's really good. I feel like that's a really good flavor. And what I was really trying to do there was I wanted to feel complete about the introduction of the podcast before we moved on and just make
Okay,
sure that we really covered where you're coming from. And I actually do now feel really good about that. Omeed,
cool.
from your side, are there any other questions or anything, or do you want to march on into more of the M&A lessons learned the subject?
Yeah, let's dive into the lesson.
Awesome. Let's do
Yeah.
that.
So so
So
what
I have 10 of them pre-canned, and, we'll dive into some of them really need a deep dive, so we'll dive into some of them. I think we got plenty of
Okay.
time. The
cool.
first one I
All right.
wanna do, and let's preface this is this we're talking about small to medium acquisitions. These are deals in my world where the total valuation is below 20 to $25 million, right? These are not PE deals. These are not, you don't have a cap table with 15 people getting paid on it because that changes the gears on a lot of different stuff. But if you're a single person or, if your cap table has, if you guys know what a cap table, or if the listeners know what a cap table is, it's basically who's put money into the deal and who's getting money out at the other end. I know we have a lot of listeners buying their first time business. They may not know what the VC term, a cap table is.
Mhm.
That said, if you've got one or two people getting paid out of the deal, then these come into critical. These are the top, and the number one is it's a people business. You're doing deals with other people, hands down. Rapport is critical. Rapport with the seller, and throughout the process. So it's not just rapport with the seller. I like to say you may not win deals by having great rapport, but you on an a small medium business deal, but you're going to almost always lose it if you don't have it.
Mm,
So the
see.
fastest way to lose a deal is to be out of rapport or have lack of rapport with the seller. Just hands down. And the way you build that rapport is you just ask questions. And when they respond, you ask questions about the answers. You just keep
Mhm.
going deeper into deeper of what do they build? Why did they build it? Where are they trying to get? Learn all their problems, learn the intricacies of why they're trying to sell it, and try to help them solve that problem. Once you really figure out what that seller is trying to accomplish, why they're on their phone, that's the key to getting these things to the other end. And I've had dozens of people say, lost a deal because I got into the numbers right off the bat. I was very analytical, and the guy
Mhm,
just didn't feel like I
mhm,
cared about what he built. Legacy is hands down. I think that's my number 2. We'll go back to the rapport, and I'll tell you we can talk about how to build that rapport, but legacy and employee protection is way more important for most of these business owners than the size of the check they receive. I've heard
Mhm.
I
countless stories where the number 2 offer price-wise got the deal because they had deeper rapport and the owners felt that the employees would have been safer hands with the second guy.
we often hear that as a concern too. I agree with those as big issues. It's cool that with some of these, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna be like, we probably some things that we don't know. But it's also cool to just be refreshed to be like, yeah, these are some of the key issues. Even for us, sitting here as M&A attorneys. Um, yeah, rapport is so critical. I'm just vibing with what you said right now. Rapport is so critical. Especially new buyers, they jump in and they're like, "Hey, let's take over." Sometimes some of them have that excitement, their first deal type excitement. And that could definitely throw a seller off too, because that's not what they're looking for. In general, it's okay. Is this guy qualified to run this business? Maybe that's actually another one of your 10 is can this guy actually run this business?
That's part of my rapport thing. The worst thing you
Oh,
can do as a
Mhm.
buyer is start telling the seller all the different things you're gonna do to his business.
that's so true. Some
Like,
people do it though.
they do, and to be honest, as an ego check, your imposter syndrome, this is where it becomes should work in your damn favor. Excuse my French. I don't even know if I can cuss on this show. I didn't ask for
You
permission.
Yeah.
absolutely can. I already
Occasionally
did.
okay,
So
I heard you slip one, but occasionally I will.
We're
Um,
respectful, but
I'm a
natural.
redneck prior military, so sometimes stuff will come out. Born and raised in the woods, and I had some time in the military. That said,
we're all
the re
adults here, and the show's like a casual conversation.
And
So
we
it's cool.
accept you for who you are, Ron.
Exactly.
awesome. So now I lost track of where I was there. We were talking about rapport and,
Yeah, I actually wanna jump in with a point here too, and I don't know if this is, a point of consideration too, but I think there's even an importance of rapport between the advisors themselves as well, in
absolutely.
terms of do the lawyers get along? Because if the lawyers don't get along, that's like a bad sign as well of a deal. They're not gonna be able to work through the issues, so there actually even needs to be consistent rapport, not just between the buyer and the seller, but extending beyond that as well. So the rapport point is a great one. Wanted to say that. And then I would love a story that exemplifies rapport building. If you have a story that you can share about how rapport was built, that's usually a great way to paint the picture for people.
Okay, that's a good one. Trying to think of all these deals you sign so many NDAs, so I gotta be careful about saying names and saying business names and stuff.
Totally.
I'll use a third party reference because it's a little safer to do there. I have,
Right.
somebody I work with on a regular basis who has only been in mergers and acquisitions now for about a year, 10 or 12 10 or 12 months. He has currently closed 12 deals, and it sounds over, but what he's done
That's a lot.
is it is, and then what here's how he's done it though, and he's 100% on the report game. He is a master of he'll do sometimes he'll be on 2 or 3 calls before he ever gets the numbers. He just really wants to know what the owner's trying to do, what they're trying to solve, and I know of at least 3 cases where the owner had better offers, significantly better offers, where the guy was gonna give him cash, $100,000 down, $100,000 a year as an employee, and then I'll give his first name out. David came in and didn't offer any cash and offered a JV because these are all JV deals. He buys partials or takes partial ownership to solve their problems and grow them and help them sell later. So
Mhm.
it's a strategic play that he's playing, and he has an entire team behind him, so it's not like he's taking on 12 companies he has to now do something
That's
with.
what I was gonna ask.
Yeah, yeah. There are people working with him to help him do this, and a lot of them have synergies together. They can cross sell and everything from marketing to just different things. But he can get into 2 or 3 conversations, 2 or 3 hours, 2 or 3 different hours of phone calls and never even say what the revenue is. And I can do the same thing. When I get on the phone with somebody, I will steer it back if it's getting a little too long-winded into life
Mhm.
things, but our first conversation is, "Tell me what you built." Before we go any further, tell me what you built and how you built it. And we just get into
Mhm.
that. And what do you see as the future of the company? I want to know, I want to see their vision. I want to capture. If it gets to where we do talk about their family, we talk about their kids way before we talk about revenue. I really want to get to know the seller. And if it gets too far into it, I can pull off certain things that a lot of people can't because I have a quirky sense of humor and
Mhm.
that they'll have picked up on it by this. So one of my favorite statements is, "So if we're too far deep into the woods of personal stuff and I need to pull it back a little bit, I'll do something like, out of all the people you can be spending on time on the phone with right now, why are you on the phone with somebody who buys and invests in companies?
Mm,
Right? There's something. Surely you got something better to do your time. What can I do to help you get wherever you're trying to get somewhere in the world right now? You're trying to solve something. You know that 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 pulls it back up into." And here's the second thing I'll tell you about rapport and asking somebody about problems they have. They're never going to tell you the truth the first time.
Mhm.
You gotta circle around and ask the question 3 different ways, and it's not that they're lying to you, they've been taught that they have to put their best face on as to why they're selling the business.
Yeah, it's a poker game at the end of the day to an extent in the beginning, for sure.
It has. So here's a good scenario. If I say, "Why you're selling your business? I'm ready to retire." This and I tell you, ask questions, and when they ask questions and ask questions about the answers, you use a little NLP trick inside of this. It's, match mirroring, pace and leading. But the simple thing you just say, if they say, "Yeah, I'm just looking at retiring," all you have to do is look at them, pause for about 4 or 5 seconds to see if they say anything else, and just in a inquisitive voice go, "In retiring?" And just go dead
Mhm.
silent. They'll tell you more stories about the retiring, and you just get into what that looks like. You're gonna need that story of what they're doing next when it comes time to close. A lot of these deals fell because I think that's my 3rd or 4th one. We'll get into it later. There's a deep emotional tie. They built this. A lot of these guys are 2nd or 3rd generation. They're so tied to this emotionally, it's part of their identity, and if you don't know what they're trying to live into that story next when it comes time to closing and you can't remind them of that and have that conversation to bring them back to why they were doing this to start with, it won't close. We're just in a network with meeting right now with the guy who, he struggled to raise the $600,000 down he needed to buy the company, got it all in his account ready to wire to the seller, and the seller's, "Yeah, I'm not sure now." Well, he's getting cold feet, and,
that's a thing as a I have a few comments real quick back to you. And by the way, that's how we do things. We definitely want to hear your list of things, but we also just talk a lot back and forth a lot. So don't feel like I'm impinging on well, I know
"No,
you
no,
got,
no.
you're like biting at the,
No, we got plenty of time."
so yeah, we got time. And so a few comments back that I want to throw out there before we get too far away from the subjects. First of all, there on that, and the last thing you were saying, yes, sometimes you can't help if the seller is too emotionally tied, but there are definitely ways you can help remind him. It help keep the momentum and stuff like that, as opposed to if he starts getting doubts are going to close, for example, that's definitely going to be problematic and pull him back, even though maybe really nothing happened. It was all in his head. There's all sorts of things there. That's such an important thing. One thing I really wanted to echo though was on the asking questions part. I really try to emphasize to people when they're just starting to talk to the seller. Sure, definitely get to know him and what you're saying, that stuff. But what I want to mention here, something else is treat it as your first chance, or treat it as your first chance, really kick all the tires on the business and feel really comfortable. Because if you can start off the business with a few conversations and figure out a lot of problem places right at the very beginning and then feel super comfortable with it, that's a completely different scenario than if you're 2 months down the line, you've had one conversation with the seller, maybe he keeps pushing back another meeting or something, or now you're just talking to the broker and you haven't asked all these questions and you think you're going to get to them later. Those are two different universes. And you shouldn't, when you're a buyer, you shouldn't be waiting for anybody. You got to ask everything up front and check all your boxes.
Yeah. I I believe in that, but I also believe there's a way to do it that's not direct and analytical.
Yeah, let them have you tell them. Don't sometimes you don't even have to ask them, just like generally through conversation, through strong rapport, it just comes out. They're like, "Oh yeah, this with the business or that with the business. These are the problems that I've had." From the relationship itself, oftentimes people will like just spill the beans. I feel like that's what you're getting to, Ron.
Yeah, absolutely. When I said tell somebody, "Tell me everything about your business. Tell me how you built it, what about it? Tell me the story of the business." I usually can check a lot of those boxes in that conversation when they talk for 5 or 4 or 5 minutes. A lot of times, they'll tell me the revenue right off the bat. "We're doing this, and I have to bring them back." "Okay, that's cool. I know what you're making now. Oh, who's working for you? How long have they been there? What's their story? Do you like them?" I wanna know the culture, the environment, the reason, and, 'cause I'm looking for, let's be very clear, I'm not just looking for the answer, I'm looking for the tonality, I'm looking for empathy in their voice and compassion for certain things. That's a leading indicator that legacy is gonna be extremely important to them, or money's the most important thing to them. Like, the way they carry themselves in conversation is gonna tell you a lot if you just really, I've written whole articles on what I call active listening, and it's where you really engage in the listening side of this conversation. Rapport is 90% listening and 10% speaking. Right? Really diving into what do they say? How did they say it? What tone did they use? Did they really mean it? Do I need to ask that question from a different answer because they hesitated and that wasn't, you got the gut feel that wasn't the full story? And a lot of times it could be as simple as just like I said, repeating the last few words. Somebody says, "We're doing pretty good, but this year's a little rough." And then they skim over it. And when they're done with that sentence, you go, "A little rough?"
Mhm.
Mm.
And you just wait, right? Silence is a rule, man. You do after a statement like, "A little rough," and you don't say anything for 5 seconds, you leave that awkward silence there, they'll tell you the whole story most of the time.
Mhm.
And you don't wanna make them feel too I don't wanna ever have them feel totally uncomfortable. But
Mhm, mhm.
here's an interesting thing. In the real estate business, I used to joke and say, "I've never fallen in love with the house. Sticks and stones don't turn me on, but numbers do." This is right? In the business world, you can't fall in love with the numbers because the sticks and stones make the numbers. It makes a difference. A
Mhm.
house is a house, it's a comp. If the neighborhood says it pays this much, you fix it a certain way, it's gonna run. In the business, the sticks and stones have personalities, have, social issues, have
People. It's all
they're
people.
everything, all the complexities of a human being, right? Because 'Cause they're human beings. And if you don't get that and don't understand, you can really get yourself into trouble. I'll give you a good example.
Mhm.
I'm talking to a business early on in the game, engineering firm out of Dallas, I wanna say 8 to 10 people. Get on the phone with the business owner. He took the call from his office, so there are people that come in and stuff. Something happens and he just loses his stuff. He's F-bombing this, F-bombing that. I hear him, "Hold on for a second," puts me on mute, not mute, but like the sound, but he turns his camera off, but I can hear him in the background. I hear something like he kicked the trash can. He's just throwing like a toddler, right? Second call in, something similar happens. And I finally
Mhm.
just said, I just blew up about something. And I just finally had to tell him, I said, "Look, just isn't gonna work." He said, "You don't even know my business that well." I said, "I tell you what, I can't run your business. You just told me that every one of your employees have been there for 15 to 20 years. He's run this thing for 30." He's like, his newest employee was like 10, 15 years. It's like anybody that would work in that environment for that long needs that
Mhm.
environment to excel. I don't manage that way. I I just don't, and it's gonna be really awkward if I were, myself or anybody. I don't wanna hire anybody that manages by screaming, kicking stuff around, and threatening people. That's just not. I get it, you found a way to make it work for you. I don't know how to make that work for me, and I'm not trying to, and then he started getting rude with me, and I was like, "I don't You can't hurt my feelings, man. I'm prior military. You can call me anything in the world. I'm just being honest with you and telling you that this just won't work."
And I
You
wish
would
more buyers, like, had this level of awareness
Yeah,
because it's important.
and I wouldn't have got that, I would have probably fallen in love with that business pretty quick if I'd have just taken the brokers, CIMs, and all the statements
Yeah.
and looked at the numbers and the profit margin, and the employees have been there for 15 years. Everything looked good.
There's a
You
feeling element to these things though that's really important that I think people tend to ignore, and that I think that was your second point, right?
Yeah.
It's yes, in the interest of time, because it will fly by. An
Uh,
hour and a half will
uh,
fly by,
Let me
and yeah.
Yeah. So the second one was legacy and employee protection. That legacy is I couldn't live into his legacy. That was not possible. So that was the second point,
Mhm.
right? I could not live and create it and run the business the way he's run it for the last 30 years. That wasn't me. And I wouldn't hire anybody to do that. The third one is due diligence. Due diligence is more than financials, and it should never be skipped. So that, a lot
Mhm.
of these small business guys, they're told that they do creative structures and they go low money down, they can skip the whole due diligence process because they'll find
What
things
is
or
that shit? It annoys the hell out of me. If somebody even says it, I'm already and I like to think I'm a calm person.
yeah.
I'm like to think that, but when somebody says something like that, it puts me on edge instantly. I'm like, why are you trying to tell me how to do my job? I'm not gonna skip anything. In fact, I'm gonna fire you as my client.
So
All
there's
nowadays we have a no fly rule. People do stuff like that. We're just like, see ya.
So there are cases where it will work, and that's the only way. And then and I'll say the way, let's say I'll preface this because there are a few mentors out there that teach these no due diligence deals,
Oh,
and the
I
only way
know, and I don't
I,
like
the
it.
only way it works is if it's a zero down or no money down deal, and you have
Mm.
an escape clause. And I actually negotiated one of these off the early stages. Unfortunately, somebody else in the deal, the IRS, they had an IRS lien, and the IRS said they couldn't transfer the assets, so the IRS killed the deal. But that said, the biggest thing they pushed back on was my clause that said, "Hey, look, you guys are in a real mess. I'll take this business over, dollar down. I'll take over your debt. You had about 3.5, $4 million of debt. I'll take over your debt. But in the first 180 days, I have the right to give it all back to you. And so I'll bring in a forensic accounting team. We'll clean this up. If everything looks good, we'll keep moving forward. It'll be better than what you handed it to me in, but at the end of the day, I can give it back."
I hear you on that, Ron. It's just that I look at turnarounds and all those type of things as not the same thing
Right.
as typical M&A, and people should not be people say often, "Don't buy yourself a job." I was gonna say something similar to that.
Oh, there's
You're not
one. I
trying
got
to
one for that later.
yeah, you oh, okay. You're
Definitely.
trying to buy a business. You're not trying like a lot of I guess I'm trying to comment on people's there's a thing a lot of people have, which is, "Oh, this business isn't doing so well, but I can fix." It's like investments are the chance to fix things. That's not the people do that with turnarounds and stuff, but the vast majority of M&A, that's not the point.
That one triggered
Um,
me.
you can improve things, but if the things are like all broken, it's like, are you going to put a few million? Well, it depends on the deal structure and everything. But at the end of the day, I'm just trying to say that the majority of M&A deals, and definitely the majority of the ones we do, are walking into good businesses run by good owners.
Right.
Everything smooth. And sure, they're going to business bigger or roll them up or whatever. But
There
do
are
you agree with me or?
I do, and there are turnaround experts, that's what they're good at.
Mhm.
But if you're a first-time business buyer and you haven't turned around 3 or 4 businesses in a corporate environment, you probably shouldn't be that guy. It is an egotistical bullshit thing to think that I can walk in, even with me, I'm 51 years old, I run multiple businesses, some of them I've taken, fairly well into the high six figures. I don't think I've ever grown one where I crossed the seven-figure mark, but I've, like, itched it a bunch of times. But, yeah, I've got really comfortable in the lifestyle and rode those businesses out. That said, To walk in and say, "I can take something you've built and done for 30 years and do it better than you," is you better check your ego 'cause I
Yeah,
just think
especially if you've never done it, like, especially if you've never done it.
and too many people say it. They say, "I'm gonna fix X, Y, and Z and stuff." So, that's one of them, like, in the first 90 to 180 days, you should probably change absolutely nothing. One of the biggest things you can screw up in a company is step in and start making changes. Now, I'll take that back for certain things,
Right.
like software as a service and e-commerce, where you're changing software, that's one thing. But when you're touching things human has to work with on a regular basis and you're dealing with that human psychology, that they're resistance to change, I would say any business that and I see so many failing and losing all their employees by doing this. I know I've interviewed quite a few people where the company failed within 6 months of them buying it because they went in and started making changes and everybody freaking quit, right? Like their entire staff quit and they had to like scramble. That said, the best thing you can do is walk in for the first few months and just observe, learn. And then I like to tell people, make your list of things that need to be changed and interview every single employee and say, if you could change anything, what would it be? Then you're looking for alignment, right? What do I know I need to change and what do they think needs to be changed? And we start with those items because now they've suggested it, you're making the difference. You're building rapport with them. You're building that communication and that trust. They said that they would change these things. You're changing them. They need to change. You change those first, even if they're the small ones. And it makes you build that muscle that they have that say, "Hey, things need to change around here. We're starting with the ones you wanted." And but man,
They'll
there's so many
follow
people.
you. That's great leadership. It's building the bu it's, earning the buy-in of your people.
Yeah,
Love that. So the third one was don't skip due diligence,
don't
right?
skip due diligence, and it's more than just financials. Your lawyer is going to do some due diligence. The financials are due diligence. There's intellectual property due diligence. There's due diligence of software. You guys are doing SaaS company stuff and stuff like that. You better make sure that some of that software isn't open source and now you're licensed. There's just all these different things that
Good
happen,
one.
right? Yeah,
A good one. I love your
yeah,
awareness of that.
yeah.
One
So
one story I would call just a short one is, or this one business a client was gonna buy, not to name names, of course, for confidentiality reasons. It operated like in a dozen counties, but it had to have a license to operate in all of them, but only had a license to operate in one of them. And I was like, hold on. Like this business isn't going anywhere. I
yeah.
called it out like on week 2 or between week 2 to week 4.
Mm.
And that's pretty much the end of the story. Sure, that you can go to determination. Oh, I'll get the licenses. Oh, is the past liability property without the license that big? You can get all that. But at the end of the day, the seller has to have that stuff lined up. It's not, it's just like move on if you're the buyer at that point. So that's an
Mm.
example of another type of due diligence that's just as fatal as the financials not being. It's
It
just
is.
fine.
And it's so critical to understand it. The due diligence is actually this you get a story from the seller of what he wants to sell you, and the due diligence is what you're actually buying, right?
Yeah. Good.
You're going from story to a little more factual based. I can't say it's 100% facts because I've really realized how creative freaking accounting can be since I got into this space. It's more artistic than art. I there's especially the bigger the deals they get, the more creative the financials can be. That said, there's just so much the due diligence is the actual what you're buying, right? It's not the story of what's being sold, and everything else is just a painting. It doesn't tell you what it it might be a painting, that's gonna it's on a canvas that's dissolve in water the second it gets moist, right? The story and the facts are 2 different things. So that's the 3rd one, and then I'll go to the 4th one. It's just a little boost for anybody out there that's new and thinking about doing this, and I like to say, this is my favorite saying, a part of this is, "Ants can absolutely climb a mountain." Ant can
Mm,
absolutely climb a mountain. Anybody can do this. It takes tenacity, the willingness to get grudge through it, to figure things out and learn. I've got story after story from people I've had on the show that went from 0 to hero. Della, who went from a waitress at Cracker Barrel to buying a CPA firm and now helps other and sold it, now helps other people. Bakari couldn't afford to go to college. Had to drop out of college because he couldn't afford it. Started sneaking into the college classes for the ETA programs, went to both Cambridge's and Stanford's ETA program, and ended up doing introduction to deals for P&E firms, getting introducer fees, cleared 7 figures, and now is traveling the world on a year abroad because he's brokered 2 deals and speaks at the same colleges he used to sneak into. You can audit a course, but most of those courses don't take attendance, so he just goes sit in the back of the room and take notes.
That guy's smart
right?
as I love it.
Love stories like that.
You know, and I talked to other people like I've interviewed the professor that teaches ETA at Stanford,
So
and I talked
what's
David.
ETA
Hey,
stand for?
huh? Oh,
Or ETA?
entrepreneurship through acquisition.
Oh, okay, thank
So the Ivies call it that. That's where search funds originated, is in all the Ivy schools, and that's the terminology they use. So Stanford was the number 2 college to ever do search fund. David Dotson was created the 2nd or 3rd, and now he teaches there. I interviewed him, and he knew Bakari because, like, he knew that Bakari had snuck into his class, and he heard about it later, of course. But he lived in Harlem and flew out to Stanford in Palo Alto, California, and sat through his 2 weeks, worth of, classes on that. That class has a 2-year waiting program. You have to be in your MBA to get qualified to be in the room, and you got 2 years waiting to even get in there. So you have to, like, say you wanna be in there before you even start your MBA. But
And he
he
just walked in and yeah.
sat in the back room in an empty chair,
Yeah,
and they didn't take attendance, and he didn't I guess he didn't take in homework, so they never seen his name, right? And, he just took notes, listened.
love it.
But,
Cool. So ants
now
can climb a mountain. Love
ants
that.
can climb a mountain, so that's one. The next one is number 5 is it takes time. A lot of people think that this is a get rich quick scheme. I think that's absolute BS. The average thing for, a searcher, somebody looking for deals in the search world, that's a search funder. In our world, is an acquisition entrepreneur looking for a deal. The average by scholastic standard, if you look what search funders take, is 18 months to 2 years. And that's from figuring
To
out what you
close the
even
deal.
to close a deal, and that's because a
Yeah.
lot of times you're starting out you talk to most new guys, and they don't even know what they wanna buy. They have to go out and talk to a lot of business owners to figure out what industry they wanna be in, right? And to negotiating, to get it funded, to get it closed and to integrate it in, that's the average. So it takes
Mhm.
time. Don't think you're gonna quit your job and have acquired a company in 6 months. It's possible, I've seen it done, but for the average person, especially if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, because that's critical to get it done fast. You gotta know exactly what you're hunting for. Meanwhile, the rest of us we're wandering around the woods with a shotgun and not knowing what to shoot. We're just figuring out what looks tasty. So that was number 5. 6 is passive income is a lie. So short of a few products out there, all businesses take some time and energy. Real estate takes time and energy. I still own a few dozen properties. They're all owner financed. I still have to deal with them on a regular basis, right? At least during tax season, and if somebody doesn't pay one of my mortgages, the loan service provider calls me. So none of them are truly passive. And the same thing, if you're gonna, they say people, you said it earlier, I'm gonna buy a business and put a CEO in there. Cool. What are you gonna do during the executive search time? There's a 6 months to 18 months that on average it takes to put a CEO in place. Who's gonna run it then, right? Be able to run whatever you acquire for at least the short term.
Yeah, and you don't
So
wanna buy a business that, like, you don't know how to run. Let's say that CEO leaves or something happens, or that always is a possibility too, and then you're stuck holding the buck. The whole point is to be the operator of the business, to know how to build the systems and so on and so forth. That's how you're gonna ensure the success of the business. So, yeah, love that point.
so my question to people is always ask yourself if you had to run this for while you're doing an executive search, which can take 8, 10, maybe even 18 months, what would happen to the business, right?
Mhm.
So that's what I ask. What would happen to this business if if you didn't have a choice, you had to be the CEO for 18 months? Would it thrive or would it survive, right? Jump on to the next one. Zero down. It's not a myth, but it's rarer than most people say.
Pretty close, man.
It's
But you
rare.
would think that it's so prevalent the way that people talk about it.
It's not a myth, and it's rarer than most people will actually say, and I know a dozen people have done it. It's not zero down to the seller almost any of the time. It's zero down out of your pocket, and it comes from bunch of creative different strategies. If it's zero down, totally zero down where you're walking in, it's usually a JV deal. They've got a big problem they're trying to solve, and you're bringing skills. So it's not really zero down. You're bringing skills down, and you're not getting the entire business. You're not walking away with 100%. You're walking away with a piece of it. Otherwise, the seller's getting some form of money, whether it's you taking loans against assets, you doing a sell lease back on real estate. There's a bunch of ways to do low down and make it not your money. Most of them incur higher debt to coverage, basically debt. Now you got to cover that debt. You're taking a business that's been running for 15, 20 years or whatever it was before you bought it, and it's had up and down times, and you're layering a layer of debt on top of it. If you do zero down, that debt is even stronger. It's a unicorn you're hunting for because you've gotta find somebody that not only can get funded and actually have the debt, but can support it at that level, and it's just
Mhm.
riskier.
I agree with you there, but I would challenge both of you on this. Now that the SBA's changed the rules where the seller financing can comprise all the buyer's equity, it is a different universe. And sure, you're still running into that issue you mentioned there. Now you just 2 loans.
Mhm.
On the other hand, we also have seen it's different between buyer clients. Some people are really able to negotiate great seller financing terms with lower than market interest rates,
Yeah.
maybe even deferred for a few years before you have to start making payment, or chop it up into a few different notes so that you're able to really handle that servicing
I
in
agree. Yep.
or the end of the midterm. So I would say that 6 months ago, I think I was even complaining to Omeed, why the hell are people no money out of your pocket? But now I'm on the other end of the spectrum. I'm like, everybody needs to be doing this.
I'm currently hunting for one. There's a unicorn structure out there that I'm gonna eventually do, and, I don't know if we have time for it, but we'll cover it, yeah, at some point.
Yeah.
But it's the business owns real estate, the real estate's slightly undervalued, the business is fairly valued. I have a team that can overpay for the real estate through a sell leaseback structure and buy the business with the real estate money, the money from the real estate. You do a 15 to 20-year leaseback, so we can talk about that, later on if we have time. Let's run through these real quick.
Quickly on that, I have a client doing that right now. Is your team people who are buyers, or are they also lenders? Because if they are lenders in relation to that, I
The
could help my client by introducing them.
I used to have a lady who was pretty good at it. Now I've found somebody who's done, $8 billion in sell leasebacks as a broker. She's a commercial real estate broker, and she has investors lined up, and she does them around the world. I can make an introduction.
If
Yeah.
you could, yeah, my client is currently sounding out lenders. I think they might be okay on that front, but on the other hand, they're a first time buyer. And if I could introduce them somebody who could really help them along with that, I
Yeah.
would love to. So I will follow up with you separately about that. Thank you.
There's a lot of
The
stuff to
bow
learn and learn about that too.
the bow that I wanna throw on that last point about how prevalent we hear about zero money down is the success of the ability to negotiate zero money down also relates back to the first point, which is rapport.
Mm.
Yeah. It's always report. Like I said, I know people doing it. It's an advanced strategy. And the other thing, it's not like I said zero down is not a myth. It's just rarer than most people are trying to sell you. And if you really want to go down that realm, a buyer can go out and look at 1,000 business and buy 2 or 3. A buyer looking for a zero down with the business is gonna have to look at all 1,000 before he gets one done. Not actually have 1,000 conversations, but you're gonna have to run through more deals just because most sellers need something. They just do, and it's a numbers game, right? So, but it's done, and I've seen it done. I actually have a business partner who's done 1 or 2. I know a lot of people that do them do via JV versions, and I know, my sales leaseback team, she's closed the lady that runs that, she's closed deals where she's like, the seller got a check at closing. "What do you mean?" She's like, yeah, she got a six you got a six-figure check, and they put it back into the business, but we paid for the business with the real estate." So, they that said, and number 8, that was 7. Number 8 is we talked about this briefly. Players, we covered this one pretty good. Team players kill as many deals or more deals than the MVPs do. So a bad attorney, like attorneys don't kill deals, bad attorneys do. Like the wrong attorney, the wrong CPA. If you don't pick your team, the team players will kill the deal. So that's that one. Number 9, the structure of the deal can change the valuation of a business. That's one I learned significantly. It's
Yeah,
the
speak to
old
that one a little more.
Yeah. So the old it's a I think it comes back to the old phrase that you can either name the price or the terms, but you can't have both. So if I'm sitting down with you and we're building a report, and I'm gonna build some type of owner financing into it, and it's gonna be really creative, chances are I'll probably pay some more for it. I used to do it in real estate all the time. I'd go to a guy's house and he said, the neighborhood, the houses are selling for, say, this is Oklahoma, so the number's gonna sound really low to you, by most of my houses in Oklahoma. The house is worth, say, 150, 180, and the guy's, "I want 205." "Cool. Will you take $1,000 a month for 5 months?" I met his number, right? But when you look at it, as an investor, I'm at my best rate back then, I was paying 7% on loans, now it's higher. In the worst case, my short-term lenders out there that loan me money, any investor money for 15 years, they want 12.75 even back then. If I looked at what I would pay in the long run, I'd pay way more than what he wanted. So I just offered, like, "Sure, I'll give you what you want." you know, I need to make it cash flow. So will you take, X number of dollars? Or even better, will you take $500 a month for whatever, or 400 something months, right? How long can we stretch this out? So the number, like, the valuation is definitely changes based off the terms. And it happens all the way up to the PE level. If the owner, if you go into a PE firm and you're like, I'm the owner, and I was like, I want to leave, I'm not staying, they're going to offer you less. You're changing their game plan, right? So the structure of the deal definitely changes the valuation. So that was something I didn't think I would ever come across. And then the la
Do you have a story to exemplify that by I mean, you told one with the real estate, but maybe for a business acquisition, for example?
Yeah, I know somebody right now on a structured payment of a business. The owner wanted $1.5 million. He needed it for retirement. True valuation of that company probably would be, I would say probably about 800K. And what he really came down to is, look, you're doing this for retirement, right? And he's, yeah. So how are you going to structure the retirement? And he's like, I'm going to put it in an annuity and I'm going to get paid X number of dollars, add so much per month to my retirement to the day I die. And then the rest goes to my kid. He goes, "Okay, why don't we do this? We'll set up a trust, and I'll put that money into your trust, and until I hit the number you want, until I hit the 1.5." And then he did the math. He's like, it just made sense because, he couldn't qualify for an SBA loan. Anybody that would loan him that kind of money is going to want enough interest. If you look at what compounding interest does to a number, he'd have paid 2 or 3 times what that business owner wanted on the interest charges. So he just agreed to basically fund the guy's retirement. And that's how a lot of these zero down deals actually really happens. If you figure out what they're trying to do with the money and you make that happen, and if they trust you in doing it, then you can get it done. And if they don't trust you in doing it, you start having to ask them, well, cool, what's wrong with the business? Why do you think the business won't survive long enough to pay you out?
Oh, that's a good point. I'd like
Mhm.
to emphasize that in what you're saying, especially for first time buyers out there, for like more experienced buyers and sellers, they're very comfortable with negotiating different terms and trying to find alignment and better ways to advantage their position and the other side's position to find alignment. But especially for first time buyers, we found with working with the last 2 years with a lot of first time buyers that they're not too comfortable with dealing with the give and take of the terms. And when they look at the number, they think that's the number, or maybe I'm going to try and get a little lower than it. But that's not the thought process. The thought
Mhm.
process is not just what the asking price is. I was trying to get in the camera and then maybe try to get lower than that. There's all sorts of things you can do. And I like to say, and I think that just goes down to, okay, do you have experience negotiating? Because if you do, that really brings you into that understanding people and how to talk to people and figure out what's going on.
I think that's why I gravitate to this space is in the real estate business. That's what we did. We owned a foreclosure business. We negotiated short sales from banks, right? I had a team where I taught them to negotiate and fight banks for better deals. And then I got brought in on a lot of commercial deals to buy buildings and stuff and to do the negotiations for it. I consulted myself out to negotiate deals for other investors. That's a very comfortable zone for me to be in and to be in that conversation of, okay, let's come up with something creative that works for both of us and go back and forth. A lot of people aren't. They get stuck on the number. And I'll be honest, as long as the payment structure is not, if you really got to pay attention to the cash flow analysis and if they're cyclical of business, so long as you can afford that payment and be profitable and cash flow the business, the money, it makes money whether you pay the payment or not. It's going to cover it in its worst economy and the best economy. The terms are better most of the time than actually coming up with something, a down payment and being done with it for 2 reasons. One, you can get the deal done. You can get more deal done because there's just a finite people of banks and stuff are gonna loan you so much. Like, SBA caps it out at $5 million of loans total. So if you have the aspirations of buying more than one company, you can burn that up pretty quick. Number 2, the it's a strategic advantage to the seller for the tax reasons. They're only getting taxed on the money they collect at the time they collect it, and you've got them on the hook now. If something goes wrong and you need some advice, right?
They better show up for the business or they're not gonna
If they're yeah, they're gonna show up and answer the question. I often allow investors to come into deals I'm working on. I'll work a deal out, and I have an investor come in and, "Why did you want me to come in? You don't need my money." It's, "Yeah, I know. Really need your advice on this business or this, real estate deal, your specialty in that, and if I got your money, I've got your advice. You're gonna answer the phone when I call, right? So, you wanna be in on the deal? I'll let you, and I'll need your advice later." And it's the same way. So that's one of the key reasons that these deals I like the deal. if you can manage and keep that rapport, it's almost like a partnership, and that probably should be another one. Partnering with business owners and any other partner on these deals is a more taxing environment than even marriage. You'll spend more time with your business partner in most cases than marriage, and I like my running joke is, "What's the number one reason for divorce?" The number one reason for divorce is marriage, because you can't get divorced unless you're married. The number 2 reason for divorce is a breakdown in communication, right? It's a failure to meet expectations. You didn't communicate expectations, and they had unrealistic basically, the expectations they had of you and you had of them were never truly realized and met. So, same thing goes
Okay,
with these
life advice and acquisition advice all in one podcast.
absolutely, and business partnerships and partner with if you sell or finance a deal with the business owner, you become a partner with them. Right? They can really mess your world up. I got a good one. A guy buys a trucking repair business, I'll go that far. They don't repair the engines of them. I've actually looked at 2 of these, and I got somebody on the show, and we didn't put it on there because he said too much. He called me back and said, "My attorney said I can't air that." So he gave too much detail of the deal, and there's too much to edit out, so that's one of the shows we didn't air. But to make it short, he buys this company and, he's growing it, it's growing like mad. He didn't buy the real estate underneath it, so he's seller financed part of it through the seller. So he's paying the seller, money. The seller comes out by on a regular basis, and everything he changes about the company, the seller starts causing problems, and all those employees had worked for him for a long time, and he's, "Oh, we're changing this. You guys shouldn't change it. We tried that before and it failed. You're ruining my business," and it's not his, he sold it. So he's causing rift with the employees.
Mhm.
And when the guy gets to the point where he really needs to expand, there was 5 or 6 acres extra over the top of what they were using. He said, "Hey, I wanna pay to build on 2 more bays, so during the winter, I can bring 2 more semis in and work to repair on the body and the trailer." So they had a pretty good sized building where they could pull a full semi in there and repair the trailer or repair the cab or whatever. And the owner's like, "You don't need to expand yet. I don't want you building on my land." Right? So, all of a sudden, now he's got because he's still paying that guy payments and he's renting from him, he's his landlord, the guy has way too much say into what he's doing with his business. Now he has a choice to either move, right, and or just stay the way he is. And that's what I said earlier, Joe, and I said before we talk about seller finance or, sell leaseback, work with me, talk to me, and let me tell you why I picked the team I do, because 'cause they're really critical on picking investors that'll back you, and if you need to expand on the property, they'll actually help do the build out, finance it, and build it back into the deal. And that's critical on a lot of these deals because you don't wanna be in a 20-year lease, outgrow your lease, and not be able to move.
Yeah, 100%. That story is really, it's a really good story. And for me, it just ties back to a principle of there can only be one leader. There can only be one Highlander. There can't be only one leader. Every time there's property involved in a deal, w- I'd always say, so you just reminded me of this. I'm just going with you on this. I always say something if there's even a whiff that the seller may retain the property, because you really have to be the master of your own destiny. That story is like a horrible story in relation to that. And then it covers a lot of other scenarios too. It's if the seller is going to stay on as the head of sales, maybe with an earnout, it's okay. What if you have a problem with him then? And now your whole sales team is contaminated. So there is definitely a balance between driving the value you can get from the seller versus making it very clear that you're the one running the show if you buy the business.
You can say that as much as you want, and if you don't have a deep rapport with him and actually get them in alignment with you, when the brass tacks or whatever the word, I don't even know what phrase I wanna use, I'm butchering the phrase here again. When it comes down to it, you get in dispute with a seller who's run a business for 15 years, all the employees work for him for 15 years, and you've been there for 2 years, he can be a poison pill pretty quickly. All he can turn those employees against you so fast, and you basically have a mutiny on your hands, you don't run the business anymore. You think you do. You're financially on the hook to pay the SBA,
Hmm.
but to have a seller in your mix that you don't have a deep rapport with and he's not aligned and on board with your vision and your mission is dangerous.
It blows my mind when people buy businesses from people that they don't like. It literally blows my mind.
It's okay if you're gonna, "Okay, I don't like this guy." I'm gonna be brutal here. "I don't like this guy, he's got cancer, he's gonna be gone in 6 months." That's okay. Right? That's a different story, right? I'm paying the SBA, I'm never gonna see this guy again, or, "Hey, the guy just retired to the Bahamas, he's already got his house, he's already got his backpacks, I'm never gonna see him again. If I need him, I can call him on the phone, right? Or he might answer the call. That's different. But if he's going to be interacting with you, you better have the rapport number one. That's why I put it first. That is absolutely critical from start to finish, from the day you own it all the way to the day you sell it, is being able to reach back 10 years later. If that guy's still alive and you have a problem, you should have enough rapport with him and go, hey, I noticed you bought this thing 10 years ago. Our 20-year-old client just hand this over to his son. They're running it now and we're losing that client. Do you think you could bring this, at least set up a meeting for him? You can reach out to those guys, right? Not
Mhm.
without rapport, right?
Mhm.
Not without trust and, a little bit of love, as I like to call it. I'm getting old and maybe a little bit of hippie-ish here, but, a little bit of love has to be still there between you and the person you bought that from so that they feel like they're compassionate, at least for the business. That the owner still needs to love that business and wanna see it succeed long after he's gone, if you're gonna interact with them at all.
I
Yeah,
agree.
great point. Totally agree.
And then 10, last so we can finish up and have a nice little conversation afterwards, is selling the business. It takes 3 to 5 years of planning to sell a company. So if you think you're gonna flip a business in 3 or 4 months, you better make sure it actually has stellar finances when you buy it, or at least all the data there to create stellar finances. So if they have great banking and all the receipts, but they never put it into QuickBooks or one of the accounting programs, yeah, you can bring in a forensic CPA time and reconstruct it. Like the one I was telling you about, their finances were horrible, but there were stacks upon stacks of receipts, file cabinet upon file cabinet. With the right forensic CPA team, I could have reconstructed it and made it look like it should have looked. It wasn't because they ran it, to some extent, they might have run it wrong, but I would be able to find that out within the first 90 days. But because all the data was there. If you think you're gonna flip a business and put it back on the market within 3 to 5 years, you better plan that from day one because even if you skipped over the due diligence, chances are your buyer's not, and they're gonna wanna see 3 to 5 years of great finances. A PE firm's gonna wanna see, 3 to 5 years of great finances. So, that's the one thing. A lot of people I hear a lot of people go, "I'm gonna buy this, I'm gonna fix 2 or 3 things with it, and I'm gonna sell it, or I'm gonna merge these 3 I'm gonna buy this one and 2 more just like it, and I'm gonna sell it." Like, I've talked to dozens of PE firms and family offices that acquire companies, and, because we were doing a roll-up, I said, "How long do you expect us to own it before we hand it to you?" Most of them say minimum is 18 months to 2 years. So if
Mhm.
you buy 2 companies, you merge it together, they wanna see it can gel and work for a while. Most of them won't. If you're still mixing the cake, nobody wants to take a bite. You just bought these 3 companies, you're still mixing the cake, it hasn't even baked at all yet, you know, a professional buyer is gonna see that, and they might buy it, but you're gonna get a discount because of it.
That
And
makes a
then
lot
I
of sense.
I think people hear these stories where people are able to, like, yeah, turn it around in 90 days. That
yep,
gets, like, so much attention because it's such, like, an outlier of a case, and then everyone's, "Oh, yeah, I wanna do that too." Where it's just if you're hearing a story about it, it most likely is that it's, like, not that prevalent, and it's, like, such an out there case that,
yeah.
like, it gets attention.
Somebody wins the lottery every single time. How come I didn't win it? I bought a ticket. I bought more than 100 tickets in my life.
It's a
I
great
call it
point.
my ticket to my daydream. It's over $4,000,000 or $40,000,000, excuse me, 400. I keep missing that. If it's over 3 or $400,000,000, I go get a $2 ticket. I pay for the daydream. What kind of havoc would I cause if somebody handed me what kind of shit could I cause in the world? Somebody handed me like $200,000,000 worth of cash. I could really torment some people. No. Uh,
So that's where your mind goes.
it's okay. Think of
Torment. Oh, gosh, man.
you know, what kind of
Listen,
In
my
a good
my
way, in a good way.
in a good way, as fun,
In a
right?
good way.
And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not I'm not
I
talking
got
about
my
I
mind
wouldn't become
goes
an
like
evil genius. I wouldn't become the evil genius. There's some stuff I would do to just for the sheer fun of it. It was not harming any individual, but it certainly would be to my personality, right?
Okay, now we have to dive into this part of the conversation.
Okay, so, a good example probably would be anywhere there is how do I put this? Anywhere I think there's some ridiculousness in the space of wokeness and stuff, both sides are being ridiculous. Both sides are
Mm,
being absolutely absurd. So a fun billboard or something like that,
like,
just to rub both sides wrong, like just to like to stir the pot to say you're both being idiots. Everybody's like, "You're Republican or Democrat?" So, but that's irrelevant because I think both sides are corrupt. I vote one way because I think it's better for business, but I think that almost all politicians have some corruption in them, and you just pick the lesser of the evils. So
yeah,
that said,
billboards are a fun for sure. Yeah,
yeah,
billboards are definitely, like, a fun little outlet, and I'm sure, like, all those billboards on the highway, like, those, like, really wacky ones are
yeah,
just, like, someone that has, like, just a little bit extra money than they probably should have,
yeah.
and like they put it towards that.
My favorite one, I don't remember which gym it was, but I'm a heavy guy. I'm a real big guy. I'm twice the man I used to be after a couple of car wrecks, and I used to teach martial arts and exercise constantly, and I still eat like I do, so I'm really heavy. That said, I'm probably bigger than I ever wanted to be in my life, never expected myself to be that heavy, but there was a billboard, so if I say this and it offends you, get over it, I'm fat too. But there was a billboard for a while, and they had to take it down because it offended the heavy people, and it had a picture of an alien, and it said, "When they come, they'll eat the fat ones first." It was an
That's
ad for a gym,
hilarious.
and I loved it. I'm a guerrilla marketing nerd from previous trade. I have a marketing MBA. I was one of Levinson's coaches for a little bit, where I got certified to be his coach, and I would teach on the stage his low cost, high impact marketing strategies. What I did when I got out of tech is I was burned out in tech, and I went and got a master's degree in marketing and kind of cut my teeth in that realm. But I love those off the cuff, just weirdness, like catch your attention type of things. And somebody handed me unlimited cash, there'd probably be a little bit of fun and havoc we could have by
I hear you. I'm hearing this creative, fun, like for life type of fun
I
things that
would
get done angle. It
I
just,
would buy
it was very, oh, go ahead.
I'd say I'd buy every digital billboard and it
The,
would in DC and Washington, DC, and every one of them would say all politicians are crooks. And I would bribe the companies that whatever it would take to keep those up as long as I could, right? Just to, like, just to it would be all over CNN, and just for the fun of it, right? Like, just a reality check, like, how does a politician on a fixed salary become a multi-deca millionaire over her career or his career when they've got no side business,
Not
nothing.
by insider knowledge at all
No, so,
whatsoever.
Omeed. Okay, this is where we're going with this rest of this conversation. If you just won the lottery for $400 million,
Oh
what
my
first
god.
comes to mind? What comes to mind? Don't sugarcoat it or anything. What comes to mind is a few things.
Alright, I've thought about this actually. I gotta have, like, my multiple houses. I gotta have my multiple houses. I gotta take care of my family, buy them all houses. Maybe, like, a couple friends get a house or a car or something like that. That sort of thing, and then, just, like, super private island, bring the friends out. Come on, man. Like, we're all gonna
Okay.
be like
But wait. Besides houses and islands, though, I just want. So it's those to comfort for you,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
comfort and relaxation is what it sounds like, is where it goes.
Definitely, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, what about you?
For me, I don't know. I'll tell you, I do know, but it's weird. I almost feel like I'm becoming one of those like survivalist people. Maybe it's because I moved back to Washington State, not DC. You really have to be a survivor if you live there. And so much more time around nature. So my mind immediately went, and this is not, I don't daydream about money. I'm not that kind of person. But it was like I would build a giant fortress and civilization in the woods and buy like 10,000 acres. That's where my mind went.
And
I
then
don't
Ron's answer is he would flood DC with billboards that antagonize politicians.
but see, you gotta have enough of the FU money where, like, if they cancel you or anything like that, it doesn't matter, you're set, right?
Yeah, like how Elon went on the stage and told Disney to fuck off.
That would
Bleep that
totally be
out.
me. Now, I would still take
That's
care
right.
of friends, and I'd probably do I love the entrepreneurial spirit, so I do a lot of micro lending in countries where it makes a big difference. Just imagine and I've done that in the past with money I've done. We've done little micro lending type of things where there was some sites, I don't even know if they're still around, but you can put a little bit of money into it and help somebody become a goat farmer or whatever. I would take it up a little higher than that level and just it'd be fun to fund a lot of entrepreneurial spirit and make sure they have just remove some barriers for some people.
Mm,
But the joking side of me says, yeah, but I'd also see what kind of, havoc I could change in the
trouble.
world.
Yeah, what kind of trouble, what
You
kind of
know,
fun, mischief that you could
could I
get in.
change the world in a better way to make the world better by pointing out the obvious that people are trying to ignore? That all politicians are crooked, right? The news sugarcoats it. Yeah, they point it like Hunter's under a microscope now, but there are Trump's under a microscope now. Everybody's under a microscope, but seems like one side gets, they call it, prosecuted more than the other. I think if we prosecuted all the crooks and just basically it's cool, go after Trump, but also go after Hillary for everything she's done. Go after this guy. Put everybody under their microscope, every law they broke. Let's put them through the system and let's see how they come out. I'm cool with that, right?
Fair, that's fair, equality.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the one thing that bugs me is if I could fix anything, it'd be the equality of the system. And then The other side of it is it's not equal at any level, right? If you look at I'm a big fan of the underdog. If you look at any of the cities where it's heavily driven by any minority, the crime rate's higher and stuff, and it's just because the opportunity it's not it's a system that's designed with flaws. I can't human psychology comes into play. They're living into the system to some extent,
For
and I
sure.
don't wanna be mean about that, but because you can break through it, I've met so many people that have, but it's rigged. The system is rigged toward
It definitely is
yep.
harder for some than others and easier for others than some.
I've
Yeah,
I
for sure.
like, here's a good example. When I got out of the military, my mom and dad were still around. They're still alive at the time. They're gone now, but they said, "You moving back to Oklahoma?" I said, "I can't." Right? Like, there's 1 or 2 opportunities for me to be
Yeah.
in tech and be in Oklahoma. So back then, there was no remote work. If I wanted to do what I did well in the computer space, because I was in the computers before I got burned out, I needed to be in Silicon Valley. So I say the same thing when I travel, if I meet a young youth in a small town, like, "What do you wanna do?" And he's, "Wanna be in the computers." Like, "Cool, when are you leaving?" You
Mm.
can't be in downtown, rundown, crime-ridden Detroit or Chicago or some really bad area and say you're gonna be a tech entrepreneur. Figure out a way to get to Silicon Valley, figure out a way to get to Austin. That's where that's happening. Location and proximity are really critical, to success in a lot of cases like that, and, it's sad, but it's
Well,
true.
I agree with that
Yeah.
completely. I
Like, you
love
could
how I love where we took this conversation.
yeah, we're way off
Yeah.
track. But yeah, it comes down to if you have the big win and you win something really big, what could you change in the world? And yeah, I would point out the obvious just for my own, what's the word, demented sense of humor.
Yeah.
I would poke a few people in the eye, mostly politicians or bad actors in the world, right? I'd take on, I think George Soros is still alive, but his son's just as bad. I would run billboards against that sucker all day long, even though he could bury me. But the trick is to find the right attorney that can bury your cash into safe trust and stuff that just can't be got to. Annuity programs, so you have money to live. You have FU money that's like almost untouchable, right?
Mhm.
And then you can just really poke the bullies in the eye. What are they going to do? I'm 51. They can put a bullet in me. But other than that, if I got enough money, they can't cancel me out. It'd be fun.
Yeah. I love how deeply you thought about it, though. It's
Yeah, you've clearly really thought about it, and I love that.
There's been a couple times in my life where the number was up there, and I thought, "What would I do if I actually doubled this, right? Or tripled it? If I totally did retire, what would I do?" And that's how the daydream came about. But that's the fun thing is, like, everybody like, when I'm a math guy by nature, I do a lot of math on everything. So, mathematically, I should never buy a lottery ticket. But the only reason I do when they come around 4 or $500 million is like, "Cool, what would I do if I got that?" So I'll pay the $2 for the daydream. Like, "I win this. This is"
The probability trade-off is worth
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's go ahead.
Circle the conversation back though, just because we have about 2 more minutes left. I'd love if you just ran through again, like, this is what 1 was, this is what 2 is, like, as a list, just real
Yeah,
quick.
let's do that. So, top lessons learned from interviewing over 190 people on mergers and acquisitions of small to medium businesses. Number 1, it's a people business, right? It's all about the people. Rapport is critical. Number 2, legacy and employee protection are more important than the seller or to the seller than the actual size of the check they receive, right? So, where it's going. Due diligence is more than just financials, and it's absolutely critical, should never be skipped. I think I missed this statement earlier, but you're gonna do due diligence one way or the other. You're either gonna do it before you buy the deal or after you, and it's better to do it before you do it and you can walk away. Due diligence is happening. You're gonna learn everything about that business one way or the other. It's best bet is to do it before you write a check. Number 4 was an ant can absolutely climb a mountain. If you have the tenacity and drive to get this done, nothing should limit you. You can solve this. I've seen rags to riches stories in this realm as much as I've done in the real estate and anywhere else. It can be done. 5 was it takes time. This isn't a get rich quick scheme. You're not gonna make $2 million in the first 12 months. People have done it, but that's the exception to the rule, not the rule. Same thing with passive income is a lie. Be sure to be able to run these businesses you acquire, that you're gonna put some work in. You're not gonna buy it, put a CEO in it overnight. The long-term goal is you get somebody in there to run it and make it passive as much as possible, but that's a longer term. 7 was zero down is not a myth. It can be done, but it's rarer than what most people will try to sell you. Right? It's an exception to the rule again. You gotta really good at, negotiating and building rapport. 8 is the team players kill as many deals or more deals than the most valuable players, right? The buyer and the seller kill deals because it's not a right fit. The team players who kill deals because they don't understand them so fast. So make sure you have the right team. Number 9, the structure of the deal can change the valuation of the business. That's the old rule that, you can either have name your price or the terms, but you can't have both, right? So how you structure it changes the total valuation. 10 would be selling it. Selling a business takes 3 to 5 years of great financials. So if you're thinking you're going to flip a business overnight, you better buy one that already has them and you're just living into great financials, or it has all the data to make great financials and you know it, because you may overlook it, but the seller probably the new buyer probably won't. And then the last one is there's an arbitrage to this game, and a lot of people don't know that. There's different That was my bonus one we never got to, and the arbitrage of the game is there's different multiples and different valuations at the $2 million or $4 million EBITDA than there are once you get above that. The higher the EBITDA, the bigger the multiples get, the different the buyers play, and that's the game a lot of these guys want to play, is they want to buy it at 3x and sell it at 7x, and the only way to do that is you gotta cross these barriers on that EBITDA scale to where you wake up the giants. You gotta wake up the PE firms, the private or the family offices, and the strategic buyers, and in most industries, that's between $2 million in EBITDA and $4 million in EBITDA is the first big jump, and the second big jump is around 10 million.
It's a great
Mm.
bonus. And I'd go so far as to say maybe we should make that the tip of the day, Omeed, or do you want to ask for a tip of the day, Omeed?
No, I think that was like such a good there were so many sound bites in there. I think, yeah, this has been such a refreshing, enlightening conversation. Super enjoyable. Really have enjoyed having you on the podcast, Ron. Thanks for joining us this week.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me. I was a little this is the second one I've been the guest on ever.
Mhm.
So, been
Wow.
190, 200 of them where I was the asking the questions, but this is the second time I've done where I'm answering them. I think it went well.
Oh,
Think so
100.
too. Yeah,
Yeah, it went really
it
well.
went really well. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
So thanks everyone for joining us on another episode of SaaS Buyers Club. I'm your host, Omeed.
I'm your co-host, Joe.
And Ron, yeah, thanks for joining us this week. Where can people find you? How can they find you?
The podcast is on all the channels you can think of, any of your favorite listeners. It's how to exit with the two is a two. And then our domain is howtoexit.com. The two, like I said, the two. And I've got a lot of followers, about 80,000 plus followers on Twitter under Ronald Skelton, my name. And on LinkedIn, it's actually Ron Skelton. So if you're looking for me, you can search for Ronald Skelton, you'll find me. But the LinkedIn URL, it's the right one when it says Ron dash in or /Ron Skelton. So that's me on there. And that's where I spend most of my time. I probably respond faster to LinkedIn requests and conversations than I do even my email.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll make sure and put all your contact information in the show notes as well so people can find you that way too.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
No
Cool.
problem. Thanks, Ron. Hey, it was awesome talking to you again. I hope we can do this again sometime on your podcast or on ours.
Yeah, this was fun.